Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace. Strengthening the saints against Islam's assault on North America.
Well, we want to welcome you back once again to the Corner of Truth and Courage. You're listening to Fortress of Faith. This is Tom Wallace. And we have today again with us our guest, Deborah Weiss. She's been on the radio with us the last couple of days. Deborah, great to have you back on the program again.
Thanks so much for being here, Tom.
Well, Deborah is an attorney and an author and an expert specializing on free speech and terrorism-related issues. You speak at a number of events, and recently you were talking at the Act for America National Conference, and I know you've got a speech that you'll be giving with Frank Gaffney and others here in the future. But we've been talking about this M103 and the dangers of this term that they've got in this legislation that they want to make to implement this in Canada, to make it a criminal offense, some kind of a crime or some kind of fine.
It would probably be a violation if it was anything. Yeah.
I'm sorry, a what?
It would probably be a civil violation, not
civil
a crime.
violation, okay.
Yeah.
To speak despairingly about Islam in some form or manner, even though what you're saying may be truthful, right?
Right.
Okay, we've talked about this petition that was out there, E411, and other things that were going on up in Canada. And you've talked about why this is controversial, but let's move here to the United States for a moment. Is there something like this happening over here that we need to be aware of?
Yes. Actually, there is. So we're a little bit more protected when it comes to trying to stifle speech because we have a First Amendment, which allows us the greatest amount of free speech anywhere in the world. Canada, unfortunately, does not have that. They have the Canadian Charter for Rights and Freedoms, which does state that Canadian citizens have free expression, but there are a couple of clauses which slightly allows for some room of restriction. For example, you can't incite hatred or you can't incite something that is likely to result in violence, which, I don't want to get too much into that, but it's worded vaguely enough that it's open to interpretation. And repeatedly, the liberal elected officials in the parliament and also in the local provinces have tried to restrict freedom of speech in various capacities, or sometimes have restricted it maybe unintentionally. For example, in Canada, they had Section 13 of the Human Rights Act, which was definitely designed to censor free expression. It said, no person shall publish any statement that's likely to expose a person to hatred based on race or religion. And in the Human Rights Commissions in Canada, which do not operate under the regular criminal law procedures of Canada, until Ezra Levatt's case in 2008, that commission had a 100% conviction rate. It was largely tilted toward anti-Muslim rhetoric. All that had to happen was a Muslim group would file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission, and the person who was being accused wasn't allowed to have a lawyer, didn't get due process, and then they'd be slapped with a fine. And this went on for 30 years until that provision was repealed in 2013. And in America, we had recently Bill 569 to condemn anti-Muslim rhetoric. It was signed and co-sponsored by 145 out of 186 Democrats at the time. It went nowhere only because Republicans retained control. However, it shows you the mindset of the Democrats, and I hate to be partisan about it, but the fact of the matter is the push for censorship is coming from the left. It's coming from the left on college campuses, in political correctness. It's coming from leftist politicians in the West, in America, in Canada. That is where it's coming from. And as I said before, the real purpose is not to stamp out bigotry, but to shut up, legitimize, marginalize viewpoints that they don't like. And the viewpoints they don't like are conservative views, which want to retain national sovereignty, keep Judeo-Christian values and keep freedom, get rid of Islamic terrorism and call it what it is. So we have had those pushes. We had Loretta Lynch, I don't know if you remember this, after the San Bernardino attack, say she was going to prosecute speech that was, quote, edging toward violence. I don't even know what that means, but I know that it's not the constitutional standard. And she backpedaled on that statement after getting quite a lot of flack. So there have been attempts here, and actually there's another one that's pending. It's House Resolution 257, which was actually, let me see. Oh, you know what? That one actually doesn't single out Islamophobia, so maybe we can talk about that later. But it's still a push against, quote, bigotry or hatred, or now they're using the word animus, and it is being pushed by some Muslim Brotherhood front groups. So we do have the push here. We also have the push, not necessarily legislatively, but in terms of culture and societal, and just society and political correctness. So you'll see quite a lot of anti-Islamophobia conferences. You'll see anti-Islamophobia statements, sometimes by Hollywood or by academia, where they're definitely indoctrinating students in colleges that if you have any different opinions, that you're an Islamophobe. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons, is we're not going to go from having a First Amendment to not having a First Amendment overnight. In order for that law to change, you first have to create a climate and an environment in the public where people would accept the notion of quelling or restricting speech that's, quote, Islamophobic or hate speech or anything like that. And so that's what they're working on now, is to change that climate. Most college students think we should have hate speech restrictions. And if you go gradually and incrementally, it is possible that at some point we'd have 5 Supreme Court justices to say that hate speech is not protected speech and freedom of speech. And even though that's a wrong interpretation, it would still be the law of the land.
Well, there's 2 things I want to bring up as a result of what you just talked about. Number one is this idea that the Constitution is a living document, that it needs to be reinterpreted according to how we currently feel about things. And that's a false ground to be stepping on, because, you come to us as an attorney background. We are a country of laws that make precedents. When we make a case, we state, do we not, to support our case, that this law, it has been practiced this way, and we can give you this incident and this incident and this incident, where in the past rulings have been made to support that this has been the common understanding of how we interpret this law. Is that not correct?
It is correct. I'm not sure where you're going with this. I'll tell you, in researching this issue, I think that at some point that was introduced as a liberal tactic too many, many years ago, because what could have been done alternatively is just to compare each statute that was raised before the Supreme Court, for example, and analyze it on its face. Is it constitutional or is it not constitutional? Instead of, for example, if there was an incorrect interpretation of a statute, then saying, okay, that's precedent, now we have to follow it, forever until that's overturned. So the liberal ideology has obviously crept into constitutional and legal jurisprudence, whether it's in the form of having precedents or living, breathing documents, as you said, instead of just looking at the letter of the law and the intended meaning by the Founding Fathers.
Well, what I mean by that, Deborah, is that, when we state, when we come up with, we ask a judge to make a ruling on something, we don't want him to interpret it by a new feeling of what we feel the atmosphere is today. Let me give you a case in point. The First Amendment also gives the right to, or it says pretty much that the government can't establish a religion, that they cannot prohibit a person from the free practice of their religion. And historically, that's always been understood, that the government has no right to stick its nose in the church business. And so the separation of church and state was to keep the state out of the church. Well, now they've reinterpreted that since the 60s and made this new clause there in the courts and reinterpreted that. And they gave no precedence for that interpretation when other times that it was presented to try to change this, the First Amendment, they had, lots of cases that they could have stated that this courts have always ruled in favor of keeping the state out of the church, not the church out of the state. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. That's actually, the word precedent is a little bit more narrowly defined in the law than what you're alluding to. But I think what you're saying is you don't want judicial activism. You don't want judges that get up there and inject their own personal or political views into the law when what's supposed to be doing is applying the law instead of making the law.
Okay. Well, there I am as a layman, not understanding the law as you do as a lawyer. But anyhow, let me go to this other thing that I was talking about, because you mentioned about schools, the environment. If they can create the environment that hate speech is not accepted here and is illegal, and give the interpretation that's how it is in the common feeling of the people, then yes, then there may be a move one day to try to change our First Amendment to take away the rights of free speech and
There's
shape
a move
that.
now.
Yeah.
Huh? They have that move now. There's a push to get speech restricted. And if you do a survey on college campuses, a majority of the students of all political stripes believe that hate speech should be illegal.
Yeah. Well, let me give you an example. Last week we talked about it on a program. A University of Texas student, Alfred McDonald, was threatened with expulsion because he said on campus, he's a gay person, he's a bisexual person, and he said, hey, I have a problem with Islam because there's 10 countries where I would be executed there, and that conversation got back to one of his professors, professors.
Which law? Which law did he have a problem with?
In Islamic countries, that you be executed for being gay.
Right.
And he said, I have a problem with Islam because in 10 countries, Islamic countries, I would be killed if I were living there.
Sharia law.
And, speaking of Sharia laws, rules. And so, and he made this comment on campus, and that got back to one of his teachers that he was speaking disparagingly about Islam and was threatened of being expelled from college.
Right.
For that. And so, again, the idea of saying you can't say anything against Islam, even they went against a gay person who they eagerly want to support, even he was threatened for touching the holy cow of Islam. Well, I'm looking at the time, and Deborah, we ran out of time again, and we're going to have to stop here, but it's always a joy to have you on the program. We'd love to have you back in the future.
Thank you very much.
And again, folks, thank you for joining us here today at the Corner of Truth and Courage. We'll be back again with you tomorrow. And just have a few moments to remind you, we are in our fall fundraising campaign. And so your support to help us to continue is greatly needed at this time. You can call by giving a donation today at 800-616-0082. That's 800-616-0082. Or you can give safely, securely online at fortressoffaith.com. God bless you.